G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and happy Friday. You've made it to the end of the week. I hope that you're gearing up and tooling up for a fantastic weekend. Now legends, today as always, we do have a lot to go over, but in the beginning I just want to say thank you for all the lovely messages of support with then some of the news I presented yesterday coming from the neurosurgeon, and I'll give you as much information as I can when I see the oncologist on Monday morning. But it's not going to change anything. Maybe we'll have less uploads, but we will continue to grind forward and do the best that we can. But I'll let you know as soon as I know. But in today's video, of course, we need to look at the Tucker Carlson and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov's interview today. You can go and watch that on YouTube, but I have just watched it. I've taken some notes, I've taken some screenshots, and I want to present to you at least my comments on that. Then, of course, well, actually before that, we'll be looking at the maps. We'll be comparing maps, and we'll look at War Mapper's update showing the kilometre squares gained over November and what that net gain is showing. As we know, it has been speeding up, and we'll look of course at some geolocated footage to give us an idea of what exactly is happening. Some maps are showing large movements, others are showing just presence. Again, we will see. We need to look at a weapon system, an older weapon system being used by Ukraine and Russia in a creative new way, and we'll look at what a German's defense minister has said, and of course rumours of, not only rumours, I guess statements of a large Russian offensive across the Dnieper, across the river into Kherson, onto the right bank. Of course, we saw Russia pushed off that right bank in late 22, but could we see another offensive? Well, many think so. Many think it's already about to happen, that they're already in place maybe to conduct this. And as you and I know, and as more people should know, the war in late 22 is vastly different from the war in late 2024. So that's what we'll start. We'll start at some footage and some bits and pieces that I can't put in a proper folder. So this is a TM62 mine. Now, the Russian force here are using this in a satchel to throw into this building and then explode the building and bring that down, with this guy's eardrums probably questionable at this point, said to have Ukrainian forces inside of that building. Now, this is the Ukrainian forces here using a TM62 anti-tank mine as well. So we can see, and this gives us a more idea of the ongoing operation. This vehicle moving in, firing into this building, and we get a full rundown of these guys, then debusting out of the vehicle, and then back out of this area, this vehicle then withdrawing, and then we get to, if you want to watch the full footage, it will of course be on my Telegram. See the vehicle then withdrawing and then that exploding, said to be collapsing that building completely on top of Russian infantry. So we are seeing those mines used in a new and creative way. This isn't anything new, but it's just interesting to show how the Ukrainians and how the Russians are using this Soviet-era anti-tank mine. But what is interesting about that Ukrainian footage is this is where that building was geolocated. It's this building running along this road, of course, on the outskirts of Toretsk, and even on the very outskirt of the not only controlled but the grey zone territory here. Some are saying there is large advancements inside Toretsk today, but none of the maps that I specifically use are saying that. So at this point in time, a grain of salt. Now, in a couple of days, we're going to talk more about Russia's industrial capacity and their economy, and are those about to collapse, as we are being told from analysts, from professionals since 2022. We've been hearing that, and we haven't then seen that come into action. Was this just incorrect analysis? Is it just delayed? Is it still coming? Well, many people are still saying that we are right on the cusp of a Russian economics and industrial capacity collapse. So let's look at what the German defense minister has said. So Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, unfortunate last name, warned the Bundestag of the growing military threat from Russia, saying Russia has completely switched to a war economy and provides the army with 1,000 to 1,500 tanks every year. Now, firstly, I do not believe that Russia has completely switched to a war economy. That would mean the way the industry works is vastly different, as well as mobilisation. Not only mobilising into the front line, but mobilising men, women, everyone into factories too. So I believe that at least full war economy is my opinion, incorrect. The amount of tanks being made, well, we hear significantly less numbers one way and significantly different numbers on both sides of the fence. But this is the German defence minister. That is about twice as many as the 5 largest European countries have in their infantry combined. For us, it is clear. Russia is the greatest threat to our security and will remain so for the foreseeable future. But I thought Russia was on the verge of collapse and they can't make any new equipment. This is going to be answered a lot more with our interview with an economist who specifically looks at that area of the world for well over a decade and can let us know the ins and outs, what is struggling, what isn't struggling, and what maybe a bounce in the ruble or going up or going down or inflation actually means for military fighting capacity and that industrial capacity down to tanks and IFVs and all of that. And I can't wait to present that to you. Just give me a couple of days to finish it. Now, I spoke about Kherson. Now, if you don't know where Kherson is, then we come down into the south here. And of course, this is Kherson. You can see the green here. Russia has been and controlled this area before. But of course, the end of 2022, Russia was caught with their pants down on the back foot. And Ukraine managed to push out of the forces from here. So Kherson, right across here. Of course, a very strategically important area. But of course, you've got to cross a river. That is a lot more difficult than a lot of Twitter users would like to present. It's not that an amphibious vehicle just drives down a cliff and drives up the other side. Vastly different. Even infantry on small inflatable boats, still very, very difficult to do successfully. But Russian military trying to gain a foothold on islands near Kherson has gathered 300 boats on the left bank. There are currently 7 of them in the past 24 hours, so more and more assaults going on. And this is from the spokesman of the Southern Defence Forces, Vladislav Volovshin, saying they have a goal of capturing a certain bridgehead, holding it, and bringing as many of our forces and resources there as possible. All these assaults end in nothing. They are all ineffective. The enemy only suffers losses. So he's saying this is all ineffective. The enemy only suffer losses. And this is one thing we can see, is the more kilometre squares gained, the more casualties go up and the information war fighting on itself. But this is interesting, bringing as many of our forces and resources there as possible, and this makes sense for Russia. So this is, I guess, the reverse, but the exact same of Kursk. Ukraine pushed into Kursk, to try and draw forces away from the east or from the south or the southeast to then try and stabilise the situation there. Now, Russia on a whole didn't really take the bait. Some forces moved, some drone teams, some other reserves got allocated to Kursk, but for the east, the advancement still continued. But what we have said is if you are numerically the larger force, you try and open up many different shallow front lines to have your opponent then have to allocate forces of which are smaller to these fronts. Now, crossing the Dnieper is going to be insanely difficult to do effectively and hold, especially the logistics across with no bridges and drones. But if Russia can have some foothold across here, Ukraine is going to have to allocate forces of other areas to here. Ukraine is already struggling for manpower in the hottest and most critical and most strategically critical front lines at the moment. It makes sense if Russia can keep up another front line and supply men and resources to that. It makes sense because it would further thin out the Ukrainian forces. He's also said, according to Ukrainian intelligence, that Russians are currently training assault force groups at training grounds. And they involve boats from the so-called Dnieper flotilla in these trainings, division of which is transferred from these spits in early autumn. They practice elements as crossing water obstacles and crossing landing groups. But this is for assaults and crossings by small groups of infantry. Of course, you can deliver small groups of infantry across, same as the small groups of infantry that have ended up in Crimea. But to then expand that bridgehead at some point, you need to bring over your heavy equipment, your artillery, your logistical supply, everything. It's going to be very, very difficult. Earlier, the head of the OVA, Alexander Prokhodin, speaking about the situation in Kherson in an interview with Financial Times, said Russia wants to launch another offensive here, and added the Russian forces had gathered 300 boats to cross the river. So many are saying that we could see a Russian assaulting force across the Dnieper River into Kherson. Will it be successful? Will it not? Well, time will tell. Will this actually occur also? Well, we don't know exactly until we see it happen. The most recent crossings we've seen by Russia have actually been well up in the northeast. And of course, we need to have a look at the maps. Here is Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. The red check area that Russia has made within the last 24 hours. The blue, Ukraine in the last 2 weeks. So if you see blue, that may not be a new update. But we have been saying that Russia has not only been consistently gaining ground, they are consistently gaining ground at a faster pace also. And we commonly use this graph here that we have made to show Deep State and War Mapper's updates. Now, War Mapper has given us the November update. And what we see is a 149% increase on Deep State from October to November. So you can see this speeding up as well from October to November, a large increase in ground 2 shown by War Mapper's updates. War Mapper, I say, is very, very conservative towards any Russian gains. So is Deep State also, but I can't find a reliable map anywhere that may be on the more Russian side to compare the Ukrainian maps and the Russian maps together. Very difficult. I wish that Suryak, who I put as a neutral observer, at least of Ukraine, maybe some other areas, no, but I wish that he gave it kilometre squares. And as we can see, that in December up to December the 6th, that Russia is occupying about 75 kilometre squares. So this is less than the same time last month. Will we see a smaller advancement as then winter is setting in, as Russia may be hitting some more fortified positions, or will we see that increase? That is yet to be seen. And War Mapper said this: Russia has achieved net territorial gains inside Ukraine every month since November 2023. So since November 2023 that Russia has had net gains month on month. Since June 24, these gains have grown consistently larger each month, reflecting a steady acceleration in the pace of their advancement. And the net gains, the first stages of the war, surpassing last month's 538 kilometres at 702 square kilometres. And he also says here, but I couldn't have the show more and everything, Russia also retook control of approximately 112 kilometres square in Kursk for a net Russian gain of 814 kilometres squares. Remember that graph we showed, that is only within Ukraine's borders. But taking back of areas in Kursk, that is also important too, because that is being heralded as this kryptonite level negotiating card on the table, which I don't know why. Anyway, let's talk about the front line and what is occurring. So the first place, and I'm guessing this is in the bloody thumbnail, is around, I'll just call this the Ilinikia front, but is this salient that has been developing since the capture of Dalny and really the capture of Hostre Maximivkia as well. But you can see that this really is tightening up today. So we have a specific folder on this that shows some footage of where some forces actually are. So let's look at where this Russian flag has been flown. So right on the outskirts of the red controlled area, just near Romanivka, right here, we have a Russian flag being flown at that location, filmed by a drone in amongst these devastated buildings. Furthermore, we have another geolocation right on the outskirts of the red and grey zone. It was near Uspenevkia on this second, I believe this is a shed right here, this second shed there. So right where my cursor is at the moment, what we have here is a Ukrainian drone attacking then Russian units who have debusted out of this BMP to assault further. But we do know there is definitely presence and control by Deep State's map in this sector. Now, I drew a red line on that one to remind me to have a look. So controlled red to red, we're looking at 2.5 kilometers. That is really, really not far. If we go from the closest to point something like this, we're talking about 1.52 kilometers. This is really, really closing up, and I do believe we may see a large withdrawal out of here if we haven't already. The reason I say if we haven't already is, well, Noel Reports paints a vastly different picture on this front line. So if we have a look at where Uspenivkia is, this is right in here as well, controlled, but he's showing that right around Hanivkia, that this is vastly closing up all the way through to where Tredove is sitting. So he's saying that a lot of this ground in here has come under control. At this point in time, we don't know, but that is another Ukrainian map showing this. I don't have a Suryak map specifically showing what is happening here. Now, we just come slightly north of here. Of course, we have Kurakhove and Stary Turny. Russia has made more ground in Stary Turny and more ground inside Kurakhove itself. Kurakhove, very, very important area. Let's have a look here. And Syriac is confirming these advances around Stary Turny. Will we see tomorrow a push from heading west in this direction for the Russians to heading south? I think that will have a lot to do with that dam and the damage and the aftermath of that, but wait and see, because this could put Kurakhove in a really, really difficult position. If Russia can push down here, they can cut off essentially this road. This road would be very dangerous currently already, but if they can even get to this intersection or get this under better fire control, it is going to limit supplies down into this Ilanikia front as well. Remember, these fronts are not mutually exclusive. It is a push and pull one area or the other. Then we move just further north of here and we have really the Pokrovsk front from advances near Zvote and Zoria as well. Of course, this is Pokrovsk, Minigrad, incredibly strategically important areas in this fight for this front line at the moment, at least in this period of time. Give it a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, and they may not become strategically important. So let's have a look at what is occurring here. And Syriac maps, he does show this further push out from Zvote as well, but he does show as well a Ukrainian pushback in some areas. Russian army took full control over the village of this. Of course, this is the one it's reaching just out into, so he's showing a fair bit more control there. On the other hand, map corrections were made at the area of Zoroya as Ukrainian army still controls half of the locality. So Zoroya here, where they're showing the advancement of Deep State, Syriac is showing it's a map correction that Ukraine still control half of this, but he's still saying that Russia control the other half, which this map doesn't show much of that control at all. Again, this is why it's very, very important to have multiple different maps showing different things, and even then, it can be very, very confusing. Let's look at Noel Reports' map of Pokrovsk while we're here, and he's showing that Zvote still not under control, and this is said reservoir right here. So in my opinion, well behind on that front line. Look at Pustininkia. Pustininkia right in here is still showing well outside of controlled territories, as well as Yurivkia by Ukrainian deep state map, of course, with ties into the MOD. So let's move just down to the southwest a little bit, and before we get to Velika Novosilka, I want to talk about Suki Yali as well. So this is this map right in here that we have these two prongs coming out from the sort of west of Tredove. This is this red dot. So we have Sukriyali and this one that I won't even bother trying to pronounce, that Russian army made advances, he's saying, on both areas there. This all links into this whole Avdiivka bulge that is occurring. Then we have Velika Novosilka, which this also affects that area. Now, yesterday what we showed was we showed that a Ukrainian flag was flown in Novye Koma, as well as a Russian one around near Blahadne. But there are some Russian pages saying that what happened in Novye Koma is not as clear as was said. But again, a grain of salt with anything like this. Let's get straight to the hottest part. The enemy launched a counterattack in Novye Koma yesterday, but more of an informational one. He posted a video with a flag in the village, but for some reason it was not filmed from a copter, but from the ground, in some ruins. It is difficult to determine the geolocation, but even if this is the northern part of Novye Koma, at least that is where the assault groups of forces, the Vostok group of forces, clung a few days ago. Then the question arises, if the enemy was able to completely drive out our units from the village, then why is the flag being removed so covertly and not from a copter, so that the position of the flag could not be determined? It looks more like an enemy information anti-crisis. The northern part of Novye Koma is still under control of our units. The groups are in touch. No one has surrendered the village. The fighting continues. Initially, the position of the assault groups was not the most favourable because of the jump from Rozdolny. So this movement from Rozdolny out to here, of course, in that one spire, that's not going to be a fantastic way. The supply line was stretched. Now the units have managed to clear the forest belts, the east of Novye Koma, and we hope that this will simplify further work to liberate the village. So there's definitely grey zone in here. What exactly is occurring? Well, at this point in time, we don't know. But I believe Ukraine desperately need to hold this road for these areas down to the south of it. Let's look at what Syriac map has said. Now, Syriac, he shows that the Ukrainian army did recapture this locality, as we reported yesterday, by that flag as well. But he also does show the movement around Blahatne as well. So pushing on both sides of this, Ukrainian army recaptured the locality of Novaya Koma and secured again the northern supply route of Velika Novsilka. On the other hand, Russian army reached Sukiyali Valley from the axis of Novodonetsky and took control over Blahatne. So both sides pushing on both ends of Velika Novossilka at the moment. What will occur here? Well, time will tell us, but I do believe we'll see Russia try and push more and more on this northern supply route and from Rivnepil to get this west to east supply route under control as well. Again, like we always see, working on the flanks and forcing a withdrawal and that consistent grind forwards. Now, we reported that Tucker Carlson has conducted an interview with Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov. Now, in my opinion, I actually think this was a significantly better interview than with Putin. And if you actually asked me, would you rather interview Putin or Lavrov, I actually think it would be Lavrov. As a statesman with experience specifically in foreign affairs, of course, I would say go and have a listen. Of course, many people throw that Tucker is being paid by the Kremlin, paid by this, paid by that. There's no evidence of this at all. And he's, of course, in the firing line. And even Lex Friedman is in the firing line today. Of course, he reached out to do an interview with Zelensky. Zelensky's going to do an interview with Lex. Lex has also said he wants to do an interview with Putin. So now, apparently, Lex Friedman is being used and paid and whatever by the Kremlin as well. I'm sure I get a lot of criticism that I am as well. I'm not. Anyway. My first takeaway in this is that English was used. And of course, that appeals to a much wider Western English-speaking audience. And I believe that was definitely used on purpose. But this type of format, this, of course, plays into Lavrov's strengths. Regardless of what you think he is saying, regardless if you agree, you disagree, either way, you cannot deny that objectively he is very well spoken. And just being a confident speaker with a large vocabulary, a good orator, this already plays into a persona of authority and competence on whatever you are speaking about. The idea bullshit baffles brains is absolutely true when it's spoken word or debate, interview, podcast, whatever you would actually call this. Nothing in this is particularly out of what we expected. They're all talking points we've heard a lot from people like Putin, Peskov, or himself, Lavrov, as well. Now, I've just put down here that he doesn't disclose the KIA figures. He was asked about it, but said that he cannot disclose that. So we're going to go over a few interesting parts, but I will be leaving out a lot of this. Tucker asks, well, are you at war with America? And Lavrov said, well, we're not officially at war, but he does say, well, these long-range strikes that are coming in, these missiles and the information, this is being programmed or used by US or UK personnel, which we know, even just GPS, yes. So he does say, well, there's a bit of a group of people saying this is a hybrid proxy war, and he says that I agree with this. So he says there's a bit of a hybrid proxy war occurring, and the signal of the Oreshnik was directly about the use of those long-range strikes and sending a signal to the US and a large saber rattling and showing what they can actually do, what that missile is capable of. Now, they were talking about escalation and red lines. And there's a lot of claims that these red lines of Russia's, they don't actually exist. There's nuclear escalation, it doesn't actually exist. These red lines have been crossed again and again and nothing has occurred. But he said that taking it like this would be a serious mistake. What I wish was asked in this is, well, where are those escalation threats? Could Russia escalate inside Ukraine, or would they escalate with Russia's allies or other enemies of the West in maybe military hardware or technological advances or nuclear advances as well? But he does say that it would be a serious mistake to make out like those red lines do not exist. The UN Charter. Of course, we hear again and again the UN Charter needs to be respected for Ukraine. Now, the UN Charter has significantly more in it than just what Ukraine is talking about, which is the territorial integrity and sovereignty. And Lavrov here says there's a lot of hypocrisy around this, that if you want to respect the UN Charter, you can't just pick little bits and pieces. You have to respect it in its entirety. And he is saying that Russia was in its right to invade Ukraine due to the minorities being attacked or being discriminated against, that this is against UN Charter and autonomous zones, therefore it had to come in. But he points to hypocrisy in Gaza also around respecting this and through the UN. I believe at one point he's alluding to, if you're not aware, when Russia first occupied Crimea, there was dam water flowing from Ukraine down into Crimea, and that was dammed up by Ukraine to stop that water flowing. Russia went to the UN multiple times to try and get this water unblocked for things like farms and drinking, and was told no due to you're an occupying force. I've looked into this legally, and it's very, very grey of what that limitation actually is there. Same as when Israel basically had siege tactics on Gaza. That, to my reading, is a war crime that's against the UN Charter. Potentially that water is as well, irregardless of if it's an occupation force or not, because the civilians in there are just civilians in there. It's very difficult. Outside of the UN Charter, I believe everyone is working well outside of that Charter at the moment. Saying that we should implement the UN Charter, though it must be seen the UN Charter is not about territorial integrity, and that it's only seen to, he's saying the UN Charter is not just territorial integrity, but it's only seen to if the government is legitimate and that government respects the rights of their people. And this is what we've heard people like Lavrov and Putin say prior, is that there was discrimination against maybe Russian speakers or Russian elements within Ukraine. Therefore, he's saying that UN Charter doesn't hold up. And he speaks a lot about what he says the government is illegitimate, and he speaks at length, questioning the legitimacy of the government in Ukraine, of course, under President Zelensky at this point of time. He said that Oreshnik was a display to show US and its allies that we will not allow the strategic defeat of Russia. And this is something we hear more and more, and no one's ever broken down what this is. So in 22, 23, 24, we have heard, or particularly in 22, 23, Russia is strategically defeated. Obviously, they are not. Those people who said that, they are incorrect. And many said that they had been strategically defeated for the next 5 decades. Obviously, that is not true, seeing what we are seeing on the front line and seeing what the German defense minister has said also. But no one has ever said what strategic defeat looks like either. Does that mean they just pull out of Ukraine, or does that mean we have a collapse of Russia and maybe things getting fired around? It's never really been broken down. What does strategic defeat actually mean? What does that actually look like? He was asked about dialogue between the Russian Federation and the US, and he said there is very little dialogue, although there are some back channels that are open. And Lavrov explains the Americans, though, through these channels, they have a message very similar to their public message, or the exact same, that stop the war and to see to peace, and see to peace through the peace plan and the victory plans that have been laid out. So he says, basically, in the words, the effect of what you see publicly is what we're getting privately as well. He also says the US received about 30 minutes of warning to launch the Oreshnik, and it does sound like there's some automated system that when a ballistic missile is going to be launched or is getting prepared, that it is then notifies America or other nuclear powers. He does say that the Biden administration is trying to jeopardize Trump's administration, so he's trying to spearhead this in, and I don't disagree with this to a degree. We've seen that the long-range strikes, those weapons have been in Ukraine for months and months, some of which for years, and they've been signed off when the current administration lost the election. It's been signed off now. Why wasn't that signed off? If you really wanted to put Ukraine in a position of power, Mr. Biden, you would have done this 12 months ago, not after you've lost the next election or your party has lost, and then you sign it off now. What has potentially put Trump in a much more difficult position coming in, a position that obviously Biden didn't want on his administration. That's the way I'm seeing it, because why would he have not signed that off months or over a year ago when it would have been far more effective? Tucker did ask, are you willing to negotiate, and what would be your terms? This is something I would have pushed on significantly more here if I was Tucker. I wish Tucker did. It was like, no, what specifics though? Like, where's the border? Where's this? Where's that? Now, he said that they would agree somewhere along the principles negotiated in Istanbul, primarily this being not joining NATO. But he does point out that this was in April 2022, over 2.5 years ago, and it needs to take in the realities on the ground now as they have changed. And that dropping sanctions has shown us the importance of self-reliance. So he said at least the silver lining in these sanctions is shows that Russia needs to be self-sustaining and rely on itself, or maybe its very close partners. And he hasn't explicitly said that that would be a condition, although he's pointed out many would like to see it as a condition. And the byproduct of this is it may push Russia further east and further into that global south influence and influence those areas also. I believe there are silver linings to a lot. Like if you don't like Trump getting in, one thing it has shown is that Europe needs to be more self-sufficient and more internally reliant. And this may have shown Russia very similar as well. Lavrov was asked about the situation currently occurring in Syria, and he's meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Turkey and the I country that you can't say on this website to discuss specifically the situation. He was asked who's funding or backing the groups here, and he says many actors are involved. And if you want to look at an absolute to-the-line proxy war, hybrid war that is occurring between major players, have a look at Syria and where funding of some groups or areas are controlled by different countries or militants backed by different countries. This is why Syria is such a mess, is you've got different people with different fingers in pies pushing on areas that are unfriendly to each other, and sometimes the same country has fingers in multiple pies of groups that are not friendly to each other. But it'll be very interesting to see what, if anything, comes out of these meetings between Turkey, Russia, and the I country as well. Legends, I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.